This week we will be studying the endocrine system, and we're going to start out with just an overview video of the functions of the system. So a few things to review: definitely protein structure, protein synthesis, and then just realize that the lecture is not covering the entire endocrine system. We're just going to cover the pages listed here, and those are the same. Oh, they're not. I was going to say those are the same as listed in your schedule, but they're not. So just what's covered in these pages here and what's covered in the videos is what we are going to be testing over for the endocrine system. Okay, so we know that the body has different organ systems, and we know that we're going to start going through those, especially we've gone through them. This does seem a little bit out of order. This is chapter 17, so it's a little bit odd that Dr. Lin put it here, but I can actually understand why he did. So it does help to understand a little bit more about other systems before you jump into the endocrine system. If you do this one first, it feels a little overwhelming and kind of like you're not understanding what's going on. So the systems have to be integrated. We've already talked about how digestive system and circulatory system and respiratory system kind of work together or similar functions, or some organs kind of have more than one function in different systems. So the endocrine system helps with the communication between the systems, and that helps those systems be integrated or work together. Specifically, we're going to focus on the nervous system and the endocrine systems. They are able to communicate chemically. They use neurotransmitters and hormones. Now, I am assuming that you know what a neurotransmitter is. That was before my takeover of this class, but I'm hoping if you don't, you should go back and go back to the chapter about neurons and neurotransmitters. So we're going to take a close look at these two systems, about how they're similar and how they are different. But before we do that, let's just go over the four ways that communication can occur between cells. We've already used a bunch of these within specific organ systems as examples, but here they are. Gap junctions, we've already talked about that in quite a few different places, but those are openings in the cell membrane that allows signaling molecules and nutrients and electrolytes to move from cell to cell. Okay, that's pretty easy. And then neurotransmitters, so they're released from neurons. They go across the synaptic cleft to a second cell. Sometimes that's another neuron, sometimes it's a muscle. It can really be lots of other options. And then the two that are focused in the endocrine system are paracrine hormones, which are sometimes called local hormones, because they are secreted into tissues and they affect nearby cells. Or then the other type of hormones, which we'll be spending most of our time, those are chemical messengers that travel in the bloodstream. They go to other tissues and organs. And that's where the bulk of our communication is going to be, in the endocrine system. So when we talk about what's included in the endocrine system, we are including the glands and tissues and cells that secrete hormones. Now, they're in lots of different places, but we're focusing on the glands, tissues, and cells that secrete hormones. And to be considered an endocrine gland, it has to be an organ that secretes their product directly into the bloodstream. Now, we've seen the word gland used quite a bit in other things that secrete fluids, but not necessarily their product doesn't go directly into the bloodstream. So that's how you get to be an endocrine gland. And then there's those hormones, the chemical messengers. We'll be giving examples. It feels pretty vague right now. Chemical messengers that are transported by the bloodstream. And then they're going to stimulate some type of response in cells somewhere else, usually a considerable distance away. And so usually when we learn about an endocrine gland, we'll be talking about the hormones that it produces and then where those hormones are targeting, where are they going, and what's going to happen when they get there. So let's just real quick take a peek at the difference between exocrine and endocrine glands. So exocrine glands are the ones that we've studied in the digestive system, in the skin. They have ducts to carry their secretion to an epithelial surface or the mucosa of the digestive tract. Whereas the endocrine glands that we're going to focus on here do not have ducts. They have capillary networks that allow the hormones to go into the bloodstream directly. the liver is one example that really doesn't fall into one of these categories. It really does both. It releases hormones, but it also releases bile into ducts and then releases albumin, which is a protein, and blood clotting factors into the blood. So it really falls into both. And so there's some exceptions, but for the most part, what we're going to focus on here are endocrine glands. And we've also, before this, seen some examples of exocrine glands. So let's compare the nervous and the endocrine a little bit. Both are serving for internal communication within the inside of the body. Nervous has both electrical and chemical signals, whereas the endocrine only has chemical. And again, we're going to talk about what a hormone is and why they keep calling it a chemical messenger. They also both have a response, but that response is varying speeds and varying persistence. So let's take a closer look. The nervous system reacts quickly, 1 to 10 milliseconds, but then also stops quickly. Whereas the endocrine system reacts slowly, can take days for hormones to release, and then the effect may continue for weeks. So they have a difference there. And then they are both have an adaptation to long-term stimuli. So for the nervous system, they adapt quickly, so the response is going to decline, whereas the endocrine system adapts more slowly and then the response is persisting. And also the areas that they affect are different. The nervous system is targeted and specific, so maybe one organ, whereas the endocrine is general and widespread, and it can affect many organs throughout the body. So yes, they're similar, but there's also some big differences. We are going to talk about some chemicals that function both as hormones and neurotransmitters. So if some of these words sound a little familiar, that's because they're both. And then both systems have some overlapping effects on the same target cells. Now, again, we're not going to get into tons of specifics. We'll go through some specific examples, but there's tons of hormones. And so we don't want to get too bogged down in all of their names and all of their functions. We'll just do a few examples. The systems regulate each other, so the neurons are going to trigger the hormone secretion, and then some hormones stimulate or inhibit neurons. So that's kind of like a little checks and balances there. But each has certain target organs or cells. Now here's where when we learn about a hormone, we are definitely going to talk about its target organ or cells. Where is it going? Hormones pass by cells that don't have receptors for it. So a lot of times they're just passing on through and not stopping until they get to their target area. Whereas neurons, they have synapse with other neurons with receptors with the neurotransmitter or for the neurotransmitter. And there's kind of just a side-by-side how they look a little different. So, and again, what the bottom picture is a little hard to read, but it's basically endocrine cells are releasing the hormones, and then the hormones travel through the bloodstream, and then it's kind of just showing you a break in it. That may really be a far distance, and then what's happening in the target cells. The target cells have receptors for those hormones.